All right, so for my presentation, I chose the topic of whether students prefer online classes or learning in person. Um, I chose this topic because I felt like it's a very debatable topic in today's world with COVID-19 continuing to spread throughout the world and changing everybody's lives, especially students, as we're forced to take online classes because of social distancing and maintaining the guidelines set in place by the CDC. So the goal of this survey is to find out the preferences of students and to understand why these students have these preferences. And in this presentation, I'll be explaining certain graphs that I got from the information in the survey and explaining the different values and numerical representations of my information. So the first graph outlines the question of, do students prefer in-person or online instruction? And as you can see in the graph, it's very lopsided. In fact, 46 students selected in-person instruction, while only 5 of the 51 responses selected online instruction through Zoom classes. So from this data alone, we can already tell that students will most likely prefer in-person instruction over online instruction. This second graph is pretty similar to the last one. This graph is determining whether the students prefer learning by a textbook or having a physical professor to teach them. The graph provides a visual representation of how many more people prefer learning through a physical professor than by using a textbook. 49 people selected learning through a physical professor, while only 2 people prefer learning through a textbook only. So we can conclude from this graph that students prefer actually going to class and having a physical professor to help them through the class instead of just learning on their own and online. These next graphs compare how long students are willing to sit in classes. The first one asks the question, how long are students willing to sit through in-person classes? And as you can see, the majority of the students selected 1 hour, and then the second most was 2 hours. The next graph is asking the question how long students are willing to sit through online classes. And as you can see, the numbers are much lower, as most of the students selected 30 minutes and 45 minutes compared to the hour and 2 hours in the in-person class selection. So from these two graphs and the comparison in these two graphs, we can determine that students would much rather sit through an in-person class than to sit through an online class for a long amount of time. These final two graphs in this presentation are just comparing how focused the students are in each form of classes. The first graph represents how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how focused a student is in an in-person class. And as you can see, most of the data is very high, which points out that students are pretty focused overall in in-person classes. And as you can see in the second graph, the bars in the graph are much lower, representing the fact that students are less willing to sit through online classes, and they're less focused during online classes. So in conclusion, all of these graphs and the data represented in the graphs can lead to the conclusion that students prefer online class, or students prefer in-person classes much more than online classes. And these graphs provide the numerical data and the visual representations which prove the fact that students prefer in-person classes.